welcome to episode 23. We have this, if you remember, this is our ground power station with the liquid metal cooled nuclear reactor and all of these transceivers and beamed power equipment. And we are packing it up to move it somewhere else. Now, this thing is very large and this is starting to become a pretty big save. And so it is starting to interfere with my launches. So I'm going to try to move it outside the 2.5 kilometer distance, so that way it is not loaded while I'm doing launches and landing planes and things. So we just take it off and drive it to the edge until we're about, you know, 2 or 3 kilometers away, at which point it should no longer be a problem for any vehicles leaving or arriving at the Space Center, and we'll be able to smoothly continue our operations while still having this power station within reach. Getting everything deployed again now, opening all the receivers and activating all of the antennas, and then we just open out the radiators and let this thing sit here, collecting sunlight, beaming off power to people who currently don't exist, but will be using it in the future, I'm sure, once I figure out how all these technologies work. In the meantime, the Eve encounter window is coming up again. We've sent one probe already to visit the Prune way back when, but this time we're going to be a bit more ambitious, and I want to send a crew of Kerbals there. Probably not land on the surface of Eve, because that is very, very difficult. Eve is not a place you go to stay a long time. You go there, it's nice to hang around, but if you land there, you will be there a while, at least with the technology that I have. So this is going to be the drive section. So we've got these radial tanks with the engines, and those are going to loft this huge mass of fuel into orbit. Now you can see in the center there's one engine kind of sticking out. That is a nuclear engine from the interstellar pack, and it consumes liquid hydrogen as a fuel. Now what this means is liquid hydrogen is cryogenic, which means that those tanks that it's in need a constant supply of electricity. Otherwise, if the electric charge runs out, then the insulation will stop having any power, and the fuel will just boil off, and I will lose all of my fuel, which is bad, and I don't want that to happen. So we'll have to... I've put some solar panels on the side and a lot of charge storage, and that should be enough to keep it alive for now. And we're going to build out the rest of this in orbit. Now, the full spacecraft we will see once it's assembled and departs for Eve. But it's going to have, fuel engines, a section for the crew, some labs, and I also plan to have a Gilly lander. Because while we can't land on Eve, Gilly is a very attainable target, and it has some science that we'd like to grab. So now, flying this thing up into space, we're just going to put it into a nice 90-kilometer orbit, thereabouts. The nose cone comes back and sticks to us, but, we can just let it fall off the side there. And we finish the rest of our burn, get into a nice circular orbit, just raising our periapsis there. Now, cutting off the engines, drifting to apoapsis, and circularizing. So there is a docking port on the top. At this time, we do not have the 2.5 meter docking ports, which is unfortunate. It'll mean we have to do some further reinforcements. And we configure the naming so that it will show up as a ship, not a probe. Now, in this considerably smaller vessel, we have another fuel tank just sitting in that fairing there. And it will be just enough for us with the very rough calculations that I've done. Hopefully I don't end up regretting that. But this should be just enough so that we can have enough fuel to get to Eve, and then we can possibly ditch this tank, depending on how much fuel we have after all the corrections and everything pans out. But this tank should be basically removable, which should get us a little bit more delta V while also giving us some more fuel to work with. So we're just going to fly it up and rendezvous with that drive section that's already in orbit, coming up just above us shortly. 20 kilometers in the atmosphere is low, but this is pretty stable. Flies like a bullet. Really looks like a bullet, too, with that fairing. And, we just get this thing the rest of the way into orbit We're coming up pretty close to the drive section, although it is passing over us, so I suspect we will have to play a nice game of catch up once we are in orbit. And yeah, we're already getting an encounter there. So now folding out the solar panels, you can see this is just a smaller set of fuel tanks with some control and batteries in the middle, and tumbling all the while. The probe core on this doesn't have any reaction wheels, but we do have RCS, and the engines have gimbaling. So once we get into the regime of orbit and space, and we can actually ditch this fuel tank, we'll be able to use those. And we're already getting an intersect. You can see 7 kilometers on the next orbit. So we move forward a little bit, and now that we have the RCS enabled, I can just start firing randomly in different directions. And I've cut out most of the rendezvous because it's things we've already seen before. So now, docking this thing, sun is setting, it's a race against the clock, although with this camera angle there's not a lot that can be seen anyways. The docking port is highlighted there, and we're just drifting into position, lining ourselves up ever so slowly, and we dock. So this is going to be the drive section. This is all the fuel and everything. There's also some life support modules on the sides and on the middle there. And those will help us keep our crew, happy and alive and healthy on their long, long journey to Eve and back. Just orienting this thing, watching the sun set over its cold gray tanks. And we disappear into the darkness behind Kerbin. Look at that. Surely a sight to behold. In the meantime, remember this? This is the Shai-Hulud. This was our other interplanetary probe, and this was going to Duna. And it is soon to arrive. In just a few days, we will be entering the sphere of influence of Duna. And with the amount of fuel we have, we can begin some pretty major operations. We should have enough fuel to actually land on Ike and still be able to do everything else that we were planning to, which is not something that was in my itinerary. But we are close enough now that distant object enhancements does not show Duna as a distant bright red dot, because we are actually not distant to Duna at all. It is not a distant object. It is a near object, and so does not need enhancement by distant object enhancements. And it's just almost visible there. We get a notification that we're mapping some suitable asteroids with that Sentinel, and there it is there. Just a moment's notice from the sphere of influence. Actually, no, we're still a few days out. Never mind. We have still got a good bit of distance to go. Orbiting the sun at 7 kilometers per second, but that will surely be much slower once we enter the sphere of influence of Duna. And about to cross over. The alarm clock is slowing us down out of warp. And almost. There we go. Just a moment's notice from the sphere of influence. We can warp across, and we have arrived. So we're going to swing by very close to the planet. Now, originally I was thinking I could aerobrake, but those solar panels are not retractable, so they would most likely break off. And there's no heat shields or anything. Although with Duna's thin atmosphere, heat shields are not really necessary unless you're going at ridiculous speeds. But we have so much fuel in this, we can just directly go into a captured orbit. The problem is we are coming in slightly below the plane, which means we are going to be inclined a good way out, which makes it difficult for us to encounter Ike. Even though it is so tremendously massive, our inclination is pretty significant. So, what I want to do is change my plane at the right moment, and then we'll be able to encounter Ike. We also have to raise our periapsis so it is out of the atmosphere, which is just a quick burn. And you can see, yeah, we're just going to very tenuously encounter Ike. So we set up a maneuver to bring ourselves in line with the plane and keep our periapsis nice and low. Duna's atmosphere is 40 or 50 kilometers, so I want to be a good way outside of that. And that should be good enough. It should be fairly easy to get an Ike encounter. But in the meantime, we can do science. The goo feels right at home here. Magnetometer report. We've measured the interaction of the solar wind and charged particles. Gauge on the thermometer sticks. Something that went way too quickly for me to read. And that is, I think, all the science we can do at this altitude. I'm just flitting around. And it looks like on the lander module, there may not be any solar panels or antenna. I'm sure I've folded them up way in the design there, and they're just not visible. But we have other things to concern ourselves with. We have this maneuver, this plane correction, which should put us in the plane of Ike. Now, Ike is a good bit less massive than the moon. It is, by all measures, pretty small, except it is very close to Duna, and so that means it is very easy to get an encounter with it. So just by changing how much I am burning by, yep, you can see I get a nice encounter, one that slingshots us into the surface of Duna. We just gently tweak that down into something more acceptable. And yeah, that should be good enough. We can make some corrections very, very gently using the scroll wheel. 19 kilometers, that's good enough. And yeah, we have plenty of fuel. We should be able to do this with lots of fuel to spare. So now warping in close, look at those clouds. The real Mars does in fact have clouds. Its atmosphere is very thin, only about 1%, even less than that of Earth's. But that does, there have been observations around the peak of Olympus Mons, some very thin and wispy clouds. But we have more science now that we are close. The goo likes it here. It's a second home for the goo. Transmit, oh, and we are out of comms range right now. Have to wait. We have to just keep that here while we wait for the KSC to come over the horizon again. But that won't stop us from actually logging the rest of the data. Let's run the magnetometer report near Duna. What does it say? Atmospheric pressure. You're sure this is a vacuum, but given how thin the atmosphere, you can't be sure. Trace magnetic fields are magnified by the sensitive instrument. So, yeah, this is... I think we have temperature, too. Let's log it. Duna is cold. Thermal radiation at night is limited. It's definitely there, though. Yeah, Mars does not have much of a magnetic field, which is a good explanation for why it also doesn't have much of an atmosphere, because the magnetic field of a planet tends to kind of trap the charged particles and either direct them away from the surface or just kind of trap them in belts known as the Van Allen belts of radiation. Without a magnetic field, those particles and rays just kind of pass into the atmosphere, and they're so energetic that they just knock bits of the atmosphere off entirely. Which is the leading explanation for why Mars has no atmosphere at all. Now, Venus also has very little in the ways of a magnetic field, but it escapes having its atmosphere stripped away, even though it's much closer to the sun, because of the fact that its atmosphere is full of very heavy particles like carbon dioxide and sulfur and all sorts of other things. Now that we're back over the horizon, we can transmit the things home and just wait until we swing on over to Ike. And once we arrive in the sphere of influence, which will be quite soon, warping ahead, and there we go. We can do some more science. Let me get some rewards for doing the first flyby. There's no gas down there, and certainly none up here. Fascinating. And once again, we're out of horizon. You tell yourself this definitely isn't cold. And we have the magnetometer as well. I'm saving the mystery goose for the atmospheric descent and landing onto Duna, and the Science Junior as well. You've measured the interaction, this generic magnetometer message. Now we have 40 minutes until we reach our Ike periapsis. So in the meantime, we'll hopefully get back in range and we can transmit the data away, and then we'll be able to take a new set. Now, I think because it does say that we have like good comms connection, so we have full control, except I think it's just such a bad connection through those relays that it's not enough to transmit science, even though it does say we can transmit science, so I'm not sure what's up with that. Yet another antenna bug, even though I don't have any communications mods that I know of. Raising our periapsis just a touch, about 20-ish kilometers, I think. The highest mountains on Ike are of good like 12 kilometers up, so I want to have some margin for error. And we warp down closer. It does look rather large with Duna, but it is smaller than the moon. So that is nice to keep in mind for a sense of scale. Transmitting away that data now that we're in range. Still in space high, but that will be a boundary that we cross soon. Just kind of watching ourselves float sedately in, warping till we get to our periapsis, starting to burn a little bit early. And now we are close. The atmosphere of mission control is tense. The atmosphere outside is non-existent. Let's transmit that back. Let's log the temperature. What does the thermometer say? Temperature readings are nominal for this distance from Kerbal. That is very cold. What does the magnetometer say? Letting it spool out there. Trace magnetic fields, it's the same message. And look at this, we're on an escape trajectory and our orbital speed is slower than a circular moon orbit of this altitude. So this is honestly gravity closer, more comparable to that of Minmus. Although somewhere in between. Definitely very small though, even though its relative size to Duna can be deceptive. So just slowly letting ourselves get captured. And we can just throttle up the rest of the way until we circularize a roughly 20-kilometer orbit. And we'll wait for another pass, and then we will begin our descent. We still have over 2 kilometers per second, and we've captured into Duna orbit and gone to Ike. We have lots of fuel in this stage. I definitely way overbuilt it. So I'm going to aim to come down in one of these flat regions here. I'm not going to bother with a plane change because that would be pretty expensive, and I want to give myself plenty of room to work with. So we just start our burn. I'm going to aim to come down in this valley right here. Just slowly killing off our speed until, we get some good estimates for a rough patch of land, which I think is going to be right here. So this is kind of tucked between the hills, and I want to make sure I don't come down on a slope because this has no landing gear, and landing on the engine bell would be very precarious since it is a long and skinny thing. And it does not have great torque either, which means I will have to come in very slow and make sure I've killed off all my lateral speed as we touch down onto the surface. Now coming in, slowed it down to real time. And yeah, we are landing on a bit of a slope. The flight engineer landing indicator is actually a pretty good slope indicator as well, because if the marker is clipped into the... Whoa. Okay, that is bad. Come on. Point the other way. Bring the nose up. Okay, I am locked onto retrograde. Come on. Spin around. Let's slow ourselves down. Come on. Okay, this thing is not rotating nearly fast enough. Let's not focus onto retrograde. Let's just go this way until we get somewhere flatter. Yeah, that seems much better. Okay, what happened there was I think I was locked onto retrograde and then I flipped my speed. So I started moving upwards and then it tried to point me into the ground. The problem is the only good control I can get with this is by firing the engine, which led to a bit of a risky situation there. So I'm just going to kind of gently kill off my speed here. I don't want to get too overzealous with it, and I want to avoid what happened there. Just watching the horizontal speed. And, we can point retrograde. This is going to take a while. Most of our speed is lateral at this time. So now, low throttle, nice and slow is how this should be done. So that way we have plenty of room to correct, because overcorrecting in a situation like this can be lethal. Now, horizontal speed is very low, and we're falling a little bit quickly. And I want to get my instruments so I can pin them. We are coming down quickly. And come on. Where's my thermometer? Oh, we are wobbling around. Okay, and shoot, we are flipping around again. Nope. Okay. Got distracted looking for my science readings to pin there. I want to kind of touch and go. I don't want to spend too... Whoa, okay. I am still locked onto retrograde. Okay, one thing at a time. Let's get this under control. Or at least get myself safe. And then I can pin my thermometer, and now I can focus on landing this thing. Okay, point retrograde. I have burned through about 600 meters per second of fuel in this descent. That is way more than I ever wanted to. Okay, point in the right direction. Kill off the speed. Come on. 20 meters per second. That is still too fast, even in this gravity. It's not about the fall, it's about the sudden stop at the end. Okay, 6 meters per second. Bringing ourselves back up to vertical. Okay, and once we're there, point it most of the way up. And let ourselves fall. Go off retrograde. Come on. Touch the surface. Okay, let's take the data. Temperature, pressure. Get off the ground. Okay. Now we can get back into orbit. Where is east? East is this way. Point this way. We got a lot of money for all of that. And fire the engines and let's get this thing back into orbit. Okay. 1.2 kilometers per second. That should still be plenty. I don't want to attempt landing on Ike again after all that we just went through. And now back to 4 times speed. Getting ourselves into a nice orbit of Ike. So, yeah. A harrowing landing. But now we have the real part of this mission, which is getting ourselves to Duna. So we have, you could see there tucked in the fairing, between the top section with the solar panels and antenna, the thing with the Science Junior, the materials bay, that is going to land on the surface of Duna. But first I have to deploy the rest of the spacecraft. And I want to do that in an orbit that does not intersect Ike, because then it has a chance of getting kicked off into space forever, and then it would no longer be orbiting Duna, which is undesirable. Because that would give us opportunities for more space around Duna science missions and contracts, which gives us a nice, steady source of income. So once we're at periapsis, just checking, if there are solar panels on this thing, then I am hard-pressed to find them. So now getting ourselves in a nice elliptical orbit so we can get low and high, and jettison that piece there. So now that is free flying. Yeah, if there are, I have forgotten where I put them. And it also looks like there is not an antenna on this thing, although we still have control. I think the short range relay is being, or the short range antenna is being relayed through that one there. That is bad. I hope that does not come back to bite me on this landing. Yep, we have completely lost contact now. And I would like to have regained it by the time we do landing. Just spinning around now. And okay, we've regained connections. So now we do a little deorbit burn, bring our periapsis to 10 kilometers, and that should get us on a good path for descent. Watching the blue sunrise. Okay, coming into the atmosphere now. Warping down. And we're about to enter the atmosphere. Okay. I'm going to try to kill off my speed using this stage. 50 kilometers. Okay, we have entered the atmosphere of Duna now. Which means we can start to do some science. Mystery goo. Goo looks longingly homeward, at least you think that's what it's doing. Barometer. Pressure reads, gasping for air. Where is my thermometer? There it is. What's the temperature like in the upper atmosphere? Turning up the thermostat in your climate-controlled suit does little to keep the cold from you. And yeah, okay, we have no comms devices. That means there are just no antenna on this at all. Okay. So that means we won't be able to transmit any of the science we get back, I think. Well, this is going to be an interesting landing. We do still have control. But we will have to see the rest of this landing and see the future of this probe in the next episode. Until next time.